Why do people stay with someone who hurts them? It's the question that gets asked about survivors of psychological abuse more than any other. And it gets asked with judgment baked into the phrasing, as if staying is a character flaw, a failure of self-respect, or a choice made from weakness. It is none of those things. Here is what it actually is. The answer is not emotional. It is neurological. The person experiencing trauma bonding is not staying because they lack self-worth or intelligence or courage. They are staying because specific, measurable changes have occurred inside their brain chemistry. Changes that create dependency, craving, and withdrawal responses that are functionally identical to chemical addiction. Understanding that changes everything about how you think about this. The pattern has a name: trauma bonding. It was first described by psychologist Patrick Carnes, who observed that intermittent abuse combined with intermittent affection creates a bond stronger and more difficult to break than relationships built entirely on consistent positive experience. The bond is forged in the cycle itself, in the oscillation between pain and relief, not despite it, because of it. Dopamine is not the pleasure chemical. That's the common misunderstanding. Dopamine is the anticipation chemical. It fires most powerfully not when you receive a reward, but when you're waiting to see if a reward is coming. Unpredictable reward schedules produce the highest dopamine spikes of any known stimulus. And unpredictability is the defining characteristic of every relationship where trauma bonding takes root. The most extensively researched demonstration of this principle is the slot machine. Payouts that arrive unpredictably, sometimes immediately, sometimes after 50 pulls, sometimes never, produce significantly more compulsive behavior than consistent payouts. The uncertainty is what drives the compulsion. Behavioral scientists call this intermittent reinforcement. Abusers, consciously or not, apply it to human relationships with devastating effectiveness. Neuroimaging studies have confirmed that the brain activity of someone in a trauma-bonded relationship is virtually indistinguishable from the brain activity of someone addicted to cocaine or opioids. The same reward circuits activate. The same withdrawal symptoms emerge when the substance, or the person, is removed. This is not metaphor. This is measurable neurological evidence that the craving is biological, not a personal failing. Oxytocin is the bonding hormone, released during physical affection, during trust, during moments of perceived safety with another person. In ordinary relationships, it builds connection. In abusive ones, it gets weaponized in a specific and devastating way. Oxytocin is also released in response to stress and fear when another person is present. Crisis deepens attachment. Shared intensity, even traumatic intensity, makes the bond stronger. Chronic exposure to an unpredictable partner keeps the body in a state of elevated cortisol, the stress hormone. Your nervous system learns to treat high cortisol as normal. When the relationship produces a moment of relief or affection, the contrast between stress and relief is experienced as euphoria. The cycle of tension and release becomes neurologically addictive. The person causing the cortisol also becomes the source of its relief. After months or years inside this cycle, the nervous system recalibrates. The hyperarousal state, the constant watchfulness, the scanning for threat, the bracing for the next incident begins to feel like normal. Calm feels wrong. Stable relationships feel boring. The absence of drama registers as something missing. This is not a personality trait. It is a conditioned neurological response, and it is fully reversible with deliberate intervention. The trauma bond begins long before the first incident of abuse. It begins with love bombing, an overwhelming flood of affection, attention, and idealization that feels extraordinary because it is extraordinary. You have never been seen this completely, valued this intensely, pursued this relentlessly. The love bombing is not accidental generosity. It is the creation of the baseline that the abuser will later weaponize through its withdrawal. During the love bombing phase, the abuser mirrors your deepest needs and presents themselves as the answer to all of them. They study your attachment wounds and speak directly to them. Your fear of abandonment? They would never leave. Your need for validation? You are the most extraordinary person they have ever known. The version they present in this phase does not exist. It is architecture, designed to make what comes next impossible to walk away from. At some point, without clear warning or logical trigger, the warmth disappears. The same person who showered you with adoration becomes cold, critical, or distant. Your first instinct is to search for what you did wrong. You review conversations, examine your behavior, look for the fault. This is exactly the intended response. The devaluation phase is not abandonment. It's a reset that keeps you working to recover approval you once had. The psychological dynamic from this point forward is fundamentally about chasing the return of the person you experienced during the love bombing phase. You know that version exists. You experienced it. So you try harder. Apologize for things you didn't do, modify your behavior, suppress your needs. The carrot is always just close enough to keep you reaching. That perpetual reaching is what the dynamic requires to function. Then it happens. The warmth returns. The version you fell for is back. Affectionate, attentive, remorseful, full of reasons and promises. Your nervous system floods with relief. The dopamine spike is enormous, enhanced precisely because of how long the waiting lasted and how uncertain the outcome felt. This is the moment the trauma bond is welded shut. Relief after sustained uncertainty produces the most powerful attachment the human brain can form. The cycle repeats. Warmth, withdrawal, crisis, relief, warmth again. Each repetition deepens the neurological groove. Your brain is being trained, with clinical precision, to associate this specific person with your most fundamental sense of safety and reward. Not because they provide those things consistently, but because they control whether you receive them at all. That control, experienced from the inside, feels indistinguishable from love. The discard is when the abuser ends the relationship, often abruptly, often cruelly, often while initiating something new with someone else. For the person being discarded, the experience is not ordinary heartbreak. It is full withdrawal from a neurologically addictive substance. Every system that had been calibrated around this person, the anticipation, the relief, the seeking, fires simultaneously with nowhere to go. The discard is engineered withdrawal. After the discard, many abusers return, sometimes weeks later, sometimes months. This is called the Hoover, named after the vacuum brand. They pull you back with the love bombing reactivated, remorse, promises, the full return of the version you missed. For a brain in withdrawal, the Hoover arrives at the most vulnerable possible moment. The relief it delivers is so powerful that most people re-enter the cycle, often believing this time will be genuinely different. Inside a trauma bond, you hold two completely contradictory realities simultaneously. The person who loves you and the person who hurts you are the same person. Your mind needs these two facts to be consistent, and they are not. The psychological tension this creates, cognitive dissonance, is profoundly destabilizing. Most people resolve it by minimizing the harm, by explaining it, by holding on to the good version as the real one and treating the damaging version as aberration. Trauma-bonded individuals are frequently among the most loyal people in any relationship. They will defend the person causing them harm to friends, family, and professionals. They will find explanations for the inexplicable, context for the inexcusable. This loyalty is not stupidity. It is a rational response to an irrational situation. The bond has been constructed to feel like the most real relationship they have ever experienced. Of course, they protect it. One of the most consistent features of trauma bonding is the victim's belief that the dynamic is their fault. That if they could just be better, calmer, more understanding, less reactive, the good version would return and stay. This belief is manufactured. The abuser has systematically attributed every incident to your behavior. The self-blame keeps you inside the dynamic because it means the solution is always something you can theoretically do. When trusted people express concern, when friends, family, or therapists describe what they observe, the trauma-bonded person typically rejects it. not because they're in denial, but because the outside perspective is genuinely incomplete. It describes the behavior without capturing the full person the bonded individual has experienced. They've seen the other version. The advice feels like being told to leave someone who doesn't actually exist in the full picture held by people on the outside. Abusers consistently work to reduce the bonded person's access to outside perspectives, creating friction with friends and family, manufacturing conflict with support networks, positioning themselves as the only one who truly understands. The isolation isn't incidental. It removes every competing reference point. When the abuser is the only source of validation, approval, and affection, however inconsistently provided, the dependency becomes total and the bond becomes the entire perceptual world. The craving you feel for the person who harmed you is not weakness, poor judgment, or lack of self-respect. It is a biological withdrawal response from a neurochemical dependency that was deliberately induced. The dopamine system, trained on intermittent reward, is firing exactly as it was conditioned to. This understanding matters enormously, not because it removes your agency, but because it names the actual obstacle and points toward the actual solution. The first and most powerful step in breaking a trauma bond is naming it. Not just knowing the relationship was unhealthy, but understanding specifically what mechanism you are inside and why it functions the way it does. When you can identify the love bombing, the intermittent reinforcement cycle, the manufactured self-blame, the experience doesn't disappear, but your relationship to it changes. You stop interpreting the craving as evidence you should go back. No contact is not punishment or drama. It is neurological detox. Every time you check their social media, respond to a message, or accept a Hoover attempt, you reset the withdrawal clock and reinforce the neurological pathway. The brain needs a clean break to begin recalibrating. Partial contact is like taking half a dose of an addictive substance. It sustains the dependency without providing relief. Complete cessation is the only route to neurological reset. The withdrawal from a trauma bond is physically real. Anxiety, intrusive thoughts, sleep disruption, difficulty concentrating, physical chest pain. These are not melodrama. They are documented neurological withdrawal symptoms. Knowing they are temporary, knowing they have a neurological cause rather than an emotional one, and knowing that they peak and then diminish, this knowledge changes how you navigate the most difficult early weeks of no contact. The brain's recalibration is significantly accelerated by external anchors, people and structures that provide consistent, predictable, positive connection. Therapy with a trauma-informed practitioner. Support groups of people who understand the specific experience. Friends who don't require you to justify the relationship or explain why leaving is hard. The nervous system learns safety through repeated, consistent, safe experiences. You cannot rebuild alone as quickly as with support. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to rewire itself in response to new, repeated experiences. The pathways laid down by a trauma bond are not permanent. Research on addiction recovery, which uses the same neurological mechanisms, shows that with sustained no contact and consistent positive experience, the hyperactivated pathways quiet over time. The craving diminishes. The obsessive thought patterns reduce in frequency. The nervous system recalibrates towards safety. This is not hope. This is neuroscience. Documenting the pattern serves two functions. First, it creates a factual record that counteracts the brain's natural tendency to remember only the good version during withdrawal, when the craving is loudest. Second, it externalizes the cycle. Seeing it written out, objectively, in sequence, breaks the cognitive dissonance that kept the contradictions from being held together clearly. The pattern on paper looks very different from the lived experience inside it. The neurological reset is accelerated by physical activity, specifically cardiovascular exercise, which produces neurochemicals that partially compensate for the disrupted reward system. Sleep, nutrition, time in nature, and social contact all contribute to restoring the nervous system to its pre-bond baseline. These are not soft suggestions. They are documented neurological interventions. The body's recovery and the brain's recovery are the same process. There comes a moment, it is different for everyone, but it comes, where the fog lifts, where the person you bonded to begins to look like what they actually were, rather than the version the love bombing created. Where the craving diminishes enough that you can observe your own thoughts about them with something approaching detachment. This moment is not the end of recovery. It is the beginning of the part where you get yourself back. You were not weak. You were targeted. Specifically, patiently, methodically targeted by someone who understood, consciously or instinctively, how to exploit the human brain's most fundamental attachment mechanisms. The fact that the tactics worked on you is not evidence of your deficiency. It is evidence of how human you are. The people most capable of deep connection are the most vulnerable to having that capacity turned against them, and the most capable of full recovery.